What will it take to solve climate change? I'm going to kick us off with just a little bit of framing and actually a reframing about the answer to that question. So let's start with talking about reversibility. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change states that a large fraction of anthropogenic climate change resulting from CO2 emissions is irreversible on a multi-century to millennial timescale, except in the case of a large net removal of CO2 from the atmosphere over a sustained period. This is our new imperative. So we're all familiar with the solutions you can see on the left here and the need to scale everything from water efficiency to family planning, methane digesters. There's a myriad of solutions available to us and the technologies that we're familiar with. We also need to focus on what we focus on at the Center for Carbon Removal, who I'm representing here today, which is the utilization of greenhouse gases. So it's kind of putting carbon back to use. And those are things like direct air capture, carbon capturing bricks, enhanced weathering of rocks, kelp aquaforestry, biochar, silvopasture, compost, regenerative grazing, which we'll hear about today, atmospheric graphene, and many more. So as Buckminster Fuller, my muse, says, pollution is nothing but the resources we are not harvesting. We allow them to disperse because we've been ignorant of their value. And once we value these greenhouse gases as a potential input for industries, we'll actually see that climate change is, in fact, reversible. About 20 to 30 years after greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere peak, we'll be able to see a global cooling or a net lowering of the average temperatures in the world. And knowing that it's temporary is really inspiring to me, knowing that this is just an era, a very awkward era, but just an era, and that climate change isn't something inevitable that our grandchildren will necessarily have to deal with. There are some baked-in impacts that I think it's really important to acknowledge, and again, this is what I like to call an awkward era. The bad news is getting worse, while the good news is getting better for a while. NASA scientists say that we have about 30 feet of sea level rise baked in. That's over the next millennia due to the heat latency of the oceans. There'll be probably on the order of something like billions of climate refugees. We'll see 800% increase in wildfires on the West Coast and political, economic, and food insecurity all at the same time. So that's all the bad news, and people often talk about runaway climate change. But we have a choice. Those same reinforcing feedback loops that cause runaway climate change could also, that same property of reinforcing feedback loops could cause runaway regeneration. And we could literally have a more verdant world if we focus on putting carbon back to life, focus on increasing the amount of biomass and soil carbon around the world. We can literally have a more verdant world than ever before. So I want to invite all of us today to kind of reframe how we think about climate change. It's often that we think about our carbon footprint and how to minimize the bad things that we're doing, but today we're talking about our carbon handprint, all the beneficial, positive opportunities and solutions that we're working on and how we can maximize our handprint. So I'm going to pass it over to our panelists who will tell us about what they're doing, what their carbon handprints are. We'll start with Amy Barnes.
Great, thanks so much, and thanks to everybody for coming out this morning. So my name is Amy Barnes. I'm a partner at a company called Allotrope Partners, and our primary focus is accelerating the transition to a low-carbon future. I might just start by sort of talking about some of the framing that was set up for us in terms of broad challenges and innovative solutions. In terms of the broad challenges, because this is really what Allotrope is focused on. So, as many of you know, the Paris climate talks last year resulted in a set of what are called NDCs, or nationally determined contributions. These are individual countries' commitments to what they'll do to address climate change, both from a mitigation and adaptation perspective. The IEA has estimated that the total cost of implementing just those NDCs is $13.5 trillion, and we know that those NDCs are insufficient to actually fully mitigating climate change. That gets us on an optimistic assessment to a 2.7 degree scenario. And a 2.7 degree scenario, as many of you in the room I'm sure know, already means, as Amanda was saying, huge refugee crises, displacement, sea level rise that means the obliteration of some small island developing states, and so it's really not an acceptable sort of path forward. And so if we want to get to the level of investment that will keep us below a 2 degree pathway, that's about 17 trillion, again, according to the IEA. So that sounds like a really big number and very terrifying, but the good news is that in the grand scheme of our global financial markets, that is not actually a huge amount of money. And so what we really need to do is just figure out how to mobilize that money and how to deploy it most effectively and efficiently. Everybody okay back there? Okay, good. To make sure that we can achieve this transition, and in the process really also achieve a sustainable development future for everybody. So, I think many days about sort of the Paris commitments in a very climate-focused way, but I was on a call this morning where we were talking about sort of the broader sustainable development goals and how you sort of interface those two. And so I think we're really going to be needing to think even more as we're sort of moving ahead, trying to move these vast amounts of capital, how they can serve both climate goals but broader development goals as well. So the good news is lots of money, but the money is a drop in the bucket, and it's out there, and there are a lot of very smart people, many of whom are on this panel, helping to think about how to be creative about how we move it. I think the challenges are, and this is one of the challenges that sort of speaks to Allotrope's business model. So myself and many of the other people in our team come from a policy background, and we, having done international negotiations, I worked for the state of California doing our international policy work for almost 3 years. After Paris, we're really energized to say, costs of renewables are coming down, we have these commitments, let's go out and do projects. And I think what you see is that there are a lot of project developers out there. There's a lot of energy and desire to build the projects that are the necessary building blocks of reducing emissions. And there are, unfortunately, in many markets, these huge capital gaps that are preventing the deployment of that money into those projects. And so I think while our vision is that when we grow up, we will be and continue to be project developers, and we are indeed doing some of that work in some more mature markets, we've also found ourselves doing a lot of policy advisory work and work with philanthropies and donors to help them think about how they can target their money to unlock some of these markets. So just 2 quick examples. One is something that we're calling the NDC Investment Accelerator, and this is working with the State Department here in the US, the National Renewable Energy Laboratories, and the World Resources Institute to pilot in a couple of countries approaches that will help with what we call the 3 Ps. So one is policy, really making sure that the policy preconditions in country are there to sort of help facilitate investment. The pipeline, so building up a pipeline of investable projects, and the purchasers, so leveraging, as I'm sure many of you know, there were really impressive corporate procurement commitments made in Paris. So leveraging that energy from potential corporate purchasers to help sort of kickstart the market in some of these countries. So that's something that we'll be piloting in 3 countries starting next year. Vietnam, Mexico, and probably the Philippines. And I think that Vietnam is a great example of a country where, on the one hand, you have a lot of, obviously, renewable energy potential, but also a lot of interest from the donor community, but at the same time, current country policy commitments to build gigawatts and gigawatts of coal. And so figuring out how we encourage them to not take that gigawatts of coal path, but go down the clean energy path, I think is going to require the combination of those 3 Ps that I talked about. And then another initiative that we have recently launched with a donor who is currently remaining anonymous is something called the Microgrid Investment Accelerator. So really looking from an energy access perspective, how you help overcome some of the finance gaps to help build microgrids to facilitate energy access in places that need it the most. So those are some of the innovative models that we're looking at to try and help overcome some of the challenges. But I appreciate you sort of framing the conversation in a glass half full perspective, because I think we definitely are in this market not because we think it's terribly depressing and climate change is going to ruin us all, but because we think there is incredible need but also incredible opportunity here. So thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. And next we'll hear from Jack.
Good morning. My name is Jack Butel. I'm CEO and co-founder of Kunoa Cattle Company. We're a vertically integrated beef business co-located on the Hawaiian Islands of Oahu and Kauai. We are an energy accelerator portfolio company. You might have seen Energy Accelerator, the booth, the Energy Lounge in the main pavilion, and we're on the panel here with another Energy Accelerator company. We raised a seed round last year with the help of Energy Accelerator, currently in a Series A investment round. We do three things. We ranch about 2,000 head of cattle on the island of Kauai. We are under contract to purchase the state's largest meat processing plant on Oahu. And we are building a brand around premium niche Hawaii proteins like this value-added meat bar that we can serve to folks in Hawaii and also potentially export around the world. So we've got three interesting points of connection to this question of climate change. Those include shipping and logistics, energy consumption in our manufacturing process, and the relationship between livestock and land and soil. And so I'll just step through those each here in the next couple of minutes, and I'm going to spend more time on the last piece because it's more interesting to me. So we have in Hawaii a really dysfunctional system. We raise as a state about 60,000 calves per year, which is fairly small when you compare to somewhere like Texas. We put most of these calves on container ships twice a week in Honolulu, and we send them to Long Beach, California, and they end up eventually, about a year later, in a feedlot in Kansas or Colorado. They get slaughtered, they get processed, and then they get commingled with animals from Florida, New York, and Minnesota, Montana, and that beef goes back out to the diaspora, right, including Hawaii. And so we're in Hawaii thinking, wow, we import 97% of our food, we're geographically remote, 88% of our food, 97% of our beef, we have food security issues. This doesn't make sense. So there's a clear sort of carbon savings opportunity when you think about producing your own food on site. And the analogy in the energy space is distributed generation, right? Let's grow our food and serve it locally to the extent we can. The second interesting point of connection to climate change has to do with energy consumption. And if you're familiar with the beef value chain, after you slaughter a beef animal, you have to hang the carcass for a period of time that ranges anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks or 5 weeks. It's called dry aging. And it's supposed to tenderize the meat and increase the flavor profile. And so in a place like Hawaii, where our energy tariffs are 3 to 5 times what you find here on the mainland, it's a really expensive process. And this is one of the reasons that as a state, we don't have a local meat business effectively. This is why, in part, we ship our animals to the mainland. So how can we, with the, I don't want to say advent of renewable energy, but with the acceleration of renewable energy in Hawaii in particular, how can we leverage that technology to mitigate that energy cost for us, which is our second highest expense line item? So one of the ways we're doing that is a starting place. This meat processing plant we're purchasing, the state just put on 100 kW of rooftop solar, and we're working with our cohort companies in the Energy Accelerator to look at technologies we can install to mitigate that profile. All right, so the third piece, which I find most interesting, and perhaps is the most controversial, so we can talk about this for the next hour, is the relationship between livestock and soil. And in Hawaii, we have a 150-year legacy of monoculture, really injurious monocultural practices from sugarcane to pineapple, right? It's left our land. The last sugarcane plantation just announced its closing like 3 months ago. So sugar and pineapple are gone effectively from Hawaii. And what that has left is thousands of acres of denuded land that has been monoculture cropped, that is not biodiverse, where there's topsoil erosion that has affected our marine systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a problem in Hawaii, which is what do we do with this land? How can we rehabilitate it to increase biodiversity, to produce food for our communities, et cetera? So what we believe, our hypothesis as a ranching company and a beef company, is that we can actually use livestock as a tool to accelerate photosynthesis, which is the process that builds soil fundamentally. And so we have aligned ourselves with an organization called the Savory Institute. Has anyone heard of Alan Savory, Savory Institute, Savory Hubs? Okay, a couple of you, right? So their model, their propagation model is called the Savory Hub Network, and we are going through the accreditation process. What the Savory Institute is about, and what this concept of holistic management is about, is mimicking natural ecological relationships between animals and land so that you can, as I said, accelerate the creation of soil. So we're implementing those practices on the ground, and we are partnering with the University of Hawaii, among others, to assess and evaluate the impact that our animals are having on our ranches, right, in Hawaii. There's anecdotal evidence for holistic management and building soil around the world, 40 years of it, really. And so we're just starting to kind of push the science in that direction. We're hoping to partner, for example, with Intentional Capital. We're exploring what that might look like to really push the science forward on that. So that's the piece that I'm most excited about. How can we use livestock to build soil? And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jack. And now we'll hear from Margaret Trilley.
Hello, my name is Margaret Trilley. I am an investor by career. I started my career in the early 90s at the firm that became BlackRock, and had changed careers a couple times there. I started out on a number of investment strategies, including what we would call socially responsible strategies, tobacco-free, South Africa-free. We didn't have those terms, the SRI term even, way back then, but this is something I've been doing for a very long time. While I was at that firm, I was an operator. I headed up a global division of technology. I headed up our global data and research and analytics group. And so several careers in that time frame. And after I left there, I headed up corporate strategy for a Fortune 500 company. So I've been an operator, an executive, a technologist, a data geek, and an investor my whole career, all somehow related and tied to impact investing. I've spent the last 5 years serving ultra-high net worth families in a number of ways. Typically, I sit at the board level, but not in all cases, and I'm somehow involved with the investment committee, overseeing what is sometimes several hundred million, sometimes multiple billion-dollar portfolio with all kinds of legacy assets like timberland or commercial real estate, also marketable securities and also private equity. And the families are multi-generational, so grandparents and newborns all in the same mix, trying to make decisions together around this shared set of assets. And so my job is very much about helping them vet their investments, set up good investment process, but also I deploy a lot of the soft skills and a lot of diplomacy in getting the family to have good communication process and decision-making processes around what is a multi-generational asset management process. So one of the things that, of course, is near and dear to my heart, but also near and dear to the hearts and minds of the next generation, is investing with meaning. And one of my biggest challenges has been to find that middle ground between the places that excite the next gens and get them really engaged and passionate about paying attention to the finances, which we have people who are financially adept, and we have people who are poets in the world, right? And I have to engage them all in the work that I do, and the best way to do that is to get them excited about a company with a great product or a great purpose. And they accidentally and sometimes unknowingly learn the finance along the way. And so for me, it's a great educational tool with the next generation, but we're met with a lot of headwinds with the older generations who might not believe that climate change is real. Yes, there are still people out there, and who might believe climate change is real, but might not feel like this is something that we can actually fix, or that they don't believe that impact investing is the way that you should be impacting the world. You should make as much money any way you can and then give it away, right? So there's a lot of ideological challenges that I have in activating what is almost $9 billion of capital for good. And the key thing for me is finding that overlap in the Venn diagram of what makes good economic sense and what are the areas of passion for the next gens. And so where I focus is on energy, food systems, and water, where I can draw a very simple supply and demand chart and convince the older generation that this is an economic opportunity and, and a place where the next gens can get excited. Without fail, everybody in that next generation is really moved by climate change. There's a lot of causes in the mix, but climate change is the one point of overlap. So that's where I focus across all of the families. And more than 50% of my time is spent on generating deal flow and helping with due diligence on those deals. But there are a lot of other ways that I work with the family and really around the soft skills in terms of activating around climate change, because that is, I have a day job around all the things I just said, but I also have a lot of passion and feel a lot of purpose in activating people around climate change, because this is something that's going to take all of us. And I'll say more about that later, but we'll pass it on to you.
Great, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Lipton, and I'm with Water Smart Software, and we are also an energy accelerator portfolio company. And we've just begun our first deployments of our platforms on the islands, which is very exciting for us. So we have developed a customer lifecycle management platform for water utilities. We're a vertical SaaS company, essentially, in the water industry. And we do a lot of things, but we help the utilities engage with end-use customers in urban environments around water use and everything related to the relationship between the utility and the customer. And a lot of that's around improved efficiency. And we use behavioral techniques to create normative comparisons of water use with similar users and drive water-saving recommendations and efficiency appliance programs to improve efficiency. And obviously, there's a very inextricably linked relationship between energy and water. And I'm not going to get into the details of the nexus right now, but needless to say that the more efficient we are with our water use, the more efficient we are with our energy use, and the more we're able to reduce carbon output and other greenhouse gases. So the water industry, I'm just going to use the United States as an example because it's what I know the best, but these trends exist all over the world, has a lot of big structural problems. And there's a term in the industry which is called non-revenue water. And that's water that's treated to made potable and delivered, but not charged for. And there's lots of reasons, says the industry, for non-revenue water. There's theft, and there's apparent losses due to meter wrong sizing, and there's all sorts of data issues that don't allow them to charge adequately for the water that they're delivering. But the reality is that the vast majority of non-revenue water is due to leakages in the distribution systems. We have distribution networks around the country that are well over 100 years old. They had design lifetimes for about 50 years, and we're not making adequate infrastructure investments to maintain that, and so we're losing massive amounts of water in our distribution networks in our urban environments. The average non-revenue water loss across the United States is 20%. It means a fifth of every gallon of water that's treated is lost to essentially leakage. And that's because the pipes are eroding. So we have a massive problem. There's expected to be about 260,000 water main breaks this year. And there's estimates anywhere between about $1 and $5 trillion of investment needed over the next 20 years into our wet infrastructure. So this is a big problem. we don't pay enough for our water. We subsidize our water. And that's why the utilities that provide us these very critical services don't have the money to invest in the infrastructure. So where's this capital going to come from? Well, it's a big question. What we're trying to do is help improve the relationship between the utility and the customer, to educate customers about the value of water and where it comes from and what it goes through to get to your house, so that every time you turn on the tap, you get clean, reliable water. The utilities have been considering themselves silent service providers for the last 100 years. Out of sight, out of mind. The only time they hear from customers is when there's a complaint about a bill or a boil notice or a service outage. So the less they hear from their customers, the better things are. But we need to change that. Customers are always on, they're always connected, they have mobile devices, they expect data transparency, they expect immediacy, they expect access. And for the utilities to start to communicate proactively with their customers about things they can do to save water, to save money, to understand what they're paying for, which is not generally the water itself, but the energy and the chemicals and the infrastructure in order to provide that clean water, then the utilities have the political capital they need to go to their city councils, because most utilities in the United States, more than 50,000 of them, are municipally run, and they can get the political support to increase the rates and reinvest in the infrastructure so we can create resiliency in our water systems and reduce that loss and improve our efficiency. So that's what we're trying to do, and we're working with over 50 utilities across 11 states, including Hawaii, and hope to be doing a lot more of this in the years to come.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicole Sistrom. I am the Director of Philanthropic Partnerships with the Prime Coalition. I come to this work from a personal background in carbon offsets, climate change, been working on it my entire career. And in my current role with Prime, I'm really focused on the promise of new breakthrough technologies to really impact the climate and hopefully create some of those runaway regenerative loops that you were speaking about earlier. So Prime's mission is to unlock charitable capital as a source of financing for, right now, early stage companies that could really impact climate change should they get to scale, but we're hopeful that this model could scale to other types of assets in the future. We're focused, as I said, on supporting breakthrough technologies, and really, we were purpose-built for this in 2014, really responding to two main drivers. One being just the importance of continuing to innovate in the technology space to address climate change, and the kind of simultaneous really drawback of early stage financing for these companies. Many people believe venture capital should play this role, and it does play a role in early stage innovation in many other sectors, but many of the people on this panel have experience with venture capital has really drawn back from companies that are working on hard technologies in the past couple of years. That's fine, it's not appropriate in many cases. So Prime's work is focused on building a new tool to address this, and really that's letting philanthropists, family offices, high net worth individuals know that they have tools in their kind of charitable toolkit to address this problem. And so the other driver that Prime was sort of founded as a result of is the fact that philanthropists don't know that they have these tools, and most of them it would be hard for them to deploy on their own. Most philanthropists are really ill-equipped to look out at all of the potential startups out there, assess which ones could actually impact climate change, of those which are good investments, and of those which are good investments are the ones that wouldn't get done but for philanthropic intervention. So Prime serves, we're a nonprofit, and our role is to be that intermediary to help philanthropists do that sorting exercise. Part of the way we do that is through a volunteer investment committee that we've put together of people who we think are the best in class, clean tech venture capitalists, some of which are in this room. So I'm happy to talk about that more. But just quickly, if you want to show the first slide, I think we've done two pilot transactions so far. The first was into a company called QuidNet. Prime led the seed round, and we facilitated this transaction. So in the support of QuidNet, a private foundation made a direct investment of equity into the company and counted it as a program-related investment, so they used grant money, but to make a for-profit investment. Another foundation made a recoverable grant to Prime, and then we made a back-to-back recoverable grant of investment into the company as well, and then there were two seed investors who cared deeply about impact, but used, taxable resources to make the investment. QuidNet has just been a great success story for us. They have a breakthrough grid energy technology. We couldn't be more pleased with how well it's going. And then I think I'll just mention quickly, if you want to go to the next slide, we have another, we just announced our second transaction a couple of months ago into a company called RedWave, which is developing a technology to convert waste heat directly into electricity. This was a little bit more complicated, but really exciting to us. We had donor-advised funds participate for the first time. So really the message here is there are lots of different ways for all kinds of charitable investors to get involved, and we've been learning a lot and are hoping to share what we've learned. Whether people work with us or not, we really think this is a really important way for people to get involved and impact climate change and support some of the great people who are up here on the panel.
Excellent. Thank you. Great. So we'd love to hear from each of you what you're doing in climate change, but since we have so many, we're going to split up into pairs and find a partner near you. Share what your organization is doing about climate change, or if it's not doing anything, why aren't you involved in the field at the present? So you'll have 2 minutes each. I'll let you know when 2 minutes is up, and then we'll have another minute to just have a brief conversation around where you think the special role is for impact investors in this space. So find a new friend, ideally, that you don't know, and kick it off. Go ahead and switch to the other person if you haven't yet. And if you haven't yet, let's talk about how impact investors have a special role. All right. Final words. Time to wrap it up and come back to the group. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to hand out some microphones and hear from the crowd. If anyone wants to raise their hand who'd like to share. All right. If everyone who sees me can raise their hand and close their mouth at the same time. All right, so we're going to hear from a couple folks if people want to share what they heard, what they learned during that, and if you just want to introduce yourself briefly, your name, your organization, and maybe who you're looking to meet in this room. So again, what did you learn from your partner, and who are you looking to meet in this room? Anyone? There's one in the back there.
Hi, I'm Sam Teicher. I'm the co-founder of Coral Vita. It's a company that's growing corals to restore dying reefs. I'd love to talk to all of you guys, whether from the perspective of starting up your own environmental enterprise or sort of knowing the perspectives that people are looking for getting an impact with financial returns, but also ecological impact, and learn that there's some awesome people in the room who are really looking to help scale up environmental ventures and trying to solve some of these really big pressing problems.
Excellent, thank you.
Hi, my name's Amelia Baxter, and I just met someone who introduced himself as a farmer, but he's involved with multi-million-dollar investments in land management and energy, sustainable agriculture and curriculum, so I got a kick out of that, because at first I thought I was talking to just a farmer. But we also do, I'm CEO of Whole Trees. We build with the natural engineering of the tree in place of steel, so it's higher value markets for forest management callings, making forestry more profitable. There's a lot of similarities in that we're both trying to seek innovative 21st century business models around land management, because this session is talking about, that's, I guess, one of the major keys to harvesting carbon, is if we could figure out how to make carbon sequestering activities profitable. So that's why I came to this session, is to see what's going on in our arena. It's a pretty cool neighbor.
Excellent. If we could hear from a couple panel members about, is carbon sequestering profitable, and what more is needed in that space in order to scale that field? Margaret, perhaps?
Well, there's not a market for that, right? So, but I do work with a number of timber families, so I would love to connect with you to make sure we're doing everything we should be. But we've worked over, on economic terms, convinced the family that they need to be harvesting sustainably, that we need 3 generations of timber on every plot, and this, they were previously clear cutting, right? And so we've moved to more sustainable processes, but again, you have to meet people where they are and make it on the economic terms, and not everybody is ready to put climate first. So I think it's just the state of where we are.
Jack, any?
Yeah, I mean, I think our business case is fairly obvious and probably very analogous to yours. I mean, we think that we can raise a healthy, attractive protein product that actually regenerates our land and ecologies and increases biodiversity. So there's no direct harvesting of value from that carbon molecule sequestered, but it's indirect, and we think it's very real.
And there's marketing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can exploit in a beneficial way the marketing cachet of those practices, and we do that. We're attempting to do that on our labels, so we think that the market rewards us for that.
Excellent. Up front here.
Thanks. So my name's Marisa Lopez, and I work for Presence. We're a technology firm. I learned a little bit about impact investment from my partner, but not much because I was so busy talking about myself the whole time that I barely had time to hear anything from her. So sorry. But I'm looking to meet people who are working on projects related to climate solutions that have ideas around how you can leverage mobile technology, virtual reality, and connected devices to help forward your mission. That is what I've brought to the company that I started with in March. And so I spent the last 10 years in tech. I spent the 10 years of my career before that in environmental conservation and marine conservation. And I'm trying to sort of marry the 2 careers right now. So really looking at how technology can be used to help with climate solutions. So if anyone wants to chat about that, find me.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Miller from the Rotor Group on the Prime Investment Committee. And so getting to your question about carbon removal, one of the problems we have is we have a market failure where we let fossil fuels pollute for free and the society pays the cost. And as long as that unfair situation is going on, it's going to be very difficult to do the right thing. So the solution to that is a price on carbon. And the best way to do that is what's called fee and dividend, where you put a rising price on the CO2 content of fossil fuels and take 100% of the money collected and give it back to every citizen on an equal basis. Most people make money on that deal, except for the wealthy, and so people will be encouraged to have a high enough price on carbon, which will drive everything we're talking about on stage today and many, many, many other things, including carbon removal, making things out of CO2, putting it underground and getting rid of it, all those kinds of things.
Excellent. Yeah, I've heard some people refer to it as instead of a carbon tax, it's a carbon tax break, which is a lot easier to sell. Nicole, do you have anything? Yeah, or Jeff?
So, in water we have a similar situation. We underprice the resource and people, use it inefficiently, and agriculture is a whole other story, and it's even worse in that case. And the solution from a market perspective is really simple, right? Charge the marginal cost of delivery for the resource, and people are going to make better economic decisions. We're not going to be growing almond trees and alfalfa that we're exporting to China to feed their cattle, which doesn't make a lot of sense in California in the middle of a drought. But the question, whether it be carbon or water or any other resource, is, I don't have the answer to this, what do we do from a policy perspective, a regulatory or political perspective, actually get people to change these practices? There will be losers. And typically those are entrenched interests that are very powerful. And how can we make these things happen? The solutions from a technology perspective or from an economic perspective are somewhat obvious in many cases. So what do we do to move the needle on the policy front?
Sure. I think totally agree with you, Dan. we definitely need some kind of price on carbon, however it is, and it's terribly difficult to get people to take that step and enact that policy. Short of that, but part of what Prime is trying to do is, if we can't have a price on carbon, wouldn't it be great if we had technologies that were just so darn attractive and profitable that people, cheap, that people wanted to invest in them or deploy them anyway? So Quidnet, the company that I talked about before, is a great example. They're, as I said, a grid-level energy storage company. They bid against a state-of-the-art battery company for the same grid project at 1/10 of the cost. So that's the kind of thing that could really, really make a big difference, short of a full-on, in this awkward period where we don't really have the policies we need to drive the change as quickly as we'd like to see it go.
Can I maybe just add, Nicole and I both come from the carbon markets world, so you're preaching to the choir here on the need for a carbon price, although as a recently former California employee, I would argue for reinvesting those dividends back into carbon solutions, not least because giving people more money to buy more things can also drive more emissions, but we can argue about that for years, probably. But yeah, I think I would just, sort of share the point that Nicole was making. I think in the absence of a carbon price, and we see how hard it is even here in the States, when you look as we do in emerging markets, there you really have fundamental issues in the first instance with just getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies, and that is a huge challenge as well. But where energy prices, for a whole host of reasons, people want to keep them low, and it would make sense to keep them low. And so I think figuring out ways to sort of help both with technologies and projects bring the costs down, and the fundamental technologies, the costs are already down, right? If you look at large-scale solar, Dubai, it was like a 2.9 cent was the recent round. That's just like that. Somebody told me that that's actually cheaper than nuclear if you were giving away the fuel for free. So we're already incredibly cost competitive, but we're talking about big projects, right? And so we can't solve the problem just with big solar projects. We need to have rooftop, we need to have C&I, and so bringing down the costs across the spectrum is really important, but also helping reduce the cost of capital. And this is a big challenge that we have in emerging markets, and I think an area where philanthropy is just sort of starting to figure out through some of the work that Prime and others are doing, sort of innovative ways to get philanthropic money in to help buy down that cost of capital. Not something that philanthropies are necessarily used to doing. Many people have started to do innovative things, so I don't want to diss anybody in the room who's already thinking about this, but I think there's a lot that we can do to leverage philanthropic money, small injections of philanthropic money to really help make transformative change.
Excellent, thank you. Up here in the front.
And I think this may be the last question.
So I'm Jennifer McFarlane. I'm an advisor to a Rwandan company called Inyenyeri. It distributes cook stoves that are about 1/10 the use of energy and therefore generates carbon energy credits under a fixed price contract. I had the pleasure of talking with Randy Flatt from Carbon Underground. She has another approach, a very valid approach, which is essentially not just sustainable agriculture, but let's improve the tilling and the other practices in agriculture so we don't release so much carbon. So it was a pleasure to meet with you.
Excellent. So I think we have time for just one more question, and then we'll do some closing remarks.
Hi, my name is Andy Gunther. I am an advisor to a company called Vale. It's a Brazilian company which is spinning off a clean tech company. And it is a company which has technology to produce zero carbon steel through biomass, and which can produce that steel cheaper than the traditional blast furnace. So I'm here basically to try and find people who are interested in that kind of technology, which I think could have a major impact on climate change around the world. steel represents about 7 to 10% of global carbon emissions today. So interested in talking to people who might have interest in that kind of an investment. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. So after this, we're all going to go and eat lunch together in the main pavilion and continue this conversation. It would be great to hear from more people what you're doing in this space and what you need and who you'd like to meet. So let's continue. But first, we'll hear from the panelists. I'd love to hear from each of you. What are some solutions that you think should have more focus and more capital poured into them? And what else is needed in order to push innovation in this space? Start with you, Amy. Yeah.
Sure. So I think I'll be provocative maybe and say that I feel like sometimes there's a lot of focus on innovation, technology innovation, and I think that's really important, but that there's a lot that we can do today to implement projects that will contribute to significant emission reductions with existing technologies. So really figuring out how to deploy existing technologies through innovations in financing structures or business models, particularly in emerging markets. Again, places like Vietnam, where you have 72 gigawatts of coal in the pipeline, that is a huge potential opportunity. People are just being shocked by the numbers that I keep throwing out here. But that is a huge opportunity where, if we wait even 5 or 10 years for a magical technological solution to solve the problem, we're going to lose a huge opportunity to get in today. So I would say business model and financing innovation to deploy existing technologies.
Excellent, thank you.
I love that answer, and I'm a little upset because you stole part of my answer, which was in the world of holistic management, we talk a lot about technology, because when we look outside of our space, most of the solutions we see are tech-based, right? And most of those technologies are surgical technologies addressing a very complex problem. And as land managers, we see land and the connections between land and the air and the water is highly complex. And so when we make decisions, we can't make them based on a single variable. So I guess my initial answer to that question is one of perspective. And as we craft solutions to address climate change, we need to think in wholes and nested set of wholes, and how, if we're using a technology, it impacts the other wholes. The other comment I have on this, and this was really just kind of a revelation to me yesterday. For years I've been saying, like the rest of you probably, that we don't have to sacrifice returns in impact investing, right? We're financial first, but we're also looking for environmental and social returns. I've been pushing that hard as a social entrepreneur for many years. Yesterday, I just had the question, and again, to be provocative, is that possible over the long term? Because what we're doing today is we're rewarding the companies that are generating these maxed out returns, but we're not accounting for their externalities, right? We've been talking about that forever, externalities. Once we account for the externalities and we internalize them, does that necessarily mean that over the long term and on average, our returns are going to be lower? And if so, does that mean that we have to adjust our expectations? Because a lot of the solutions we develop are grounded in those expectations.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to answer this from a little bit different of an angle. I just recently attended Al Gore's climate training, and everybody in this room should look into that program. It was fantastic. ClimateReality.org. Climate Reality Project. Amanda's also a graduate. Anyway, it's a fantastic program. Many of the remarks I'm going to make are some of my takeaways from that. I think the most important thing to focus on is innovation, to your point. When you find yourself in a ditch, the first thing to do is stop digging. We need to get off our consumption of fossil fuels. We are in a position, and we talked about the carbon tax, it is such a logical solution, and our democracy is broken. We are not able to help ourselves because of that, and we all wear hats in this room as heads of businesses or entrepreneurs or investors, but we wear many other hats as voters, as consumers, as investors ourselves in our 401ks and our IRAs. Those are all places where you should be voting with your dollars And so there are 4 things I think I want you to check yourself on, because we think of ourselves as the leaders of this movement, but there are 4 other things that we all should be doing with our other hats when we go home at the end of the day. So the first is activism. I considered myself an activist until I went to this climate reality training and realized that there's a lot more I could be doing. So if you aren't already on the mailing list for Credo and Left Action and all those other things, your signature on a petition is worth everything, and that is what is going to change the democracy that we are in. We can't fix it, but the politicians who represent us want to be reelected, and so they need to hear from you on these things that are very important, and the more they do, the farther we'll get. So those things come into my inbox every day. I read them and I decide what I'm going to put my name on. Sometimes I donate, sometimes I don't, and I don't let the fact that I'm not donating paralyze me there either, because I know my signature is worth more than any dollar I will donate. So I challenge you to take a look at that. Consumerism is something we all do. We all make product choices. We vote with our dollars every day as we choose products. So Tom's and some of these other companies are really out there in their marketing, but I challenge you to also think about the things the products that you love and try to understand where they come from. So we all love chocolate. M&M's is the only chocolate I know of that comes from a carbon neutral to carbon negative plant. So just going the extra mile to understand where your big ticket items are coming from and how they're doing, and sending your message to the market that way. Your investments. So get noisy and demand more from your advisors, your 401k plan administrators, and everyone around you that's advising you on the money. They will tell you that those aren't good investment decisions, and they're wrong. It's because they don't want to change or don't want to have to do the things that makes their businesses more expensive to run to cater to these requests. So if you're not getting a response from your advisors, find one who will. And finally, evangelism. This is something, as we wear our other hats, we should be talking to our parents, to our spouses, to our kids, to our neighbors, everybody that you can come in contact with to activate, help them know what to do, the previous 3 things on the list, get them going on those things too, because again, it's those signatures on the petitions that I believe are going to get our politicians moving in the right direction, and this is much bigger than all of us, or any one of us, or any one company, or any investment dollar that I can move to any particular investment. So it's going to take all of us getting a lot more noisy.
Now I have the highly unenviable role of trying to come up with something after that. Al Gore, okay. I'm going to talk to my investment advisor about that stuff. So I'm going to take a different approach. Data transparency. We need more interoperability. We need to unlock access to information across every major resource segment in our society and our economy. It exists in some areas, but even if you look at things, obviously water, close to my heart, big problem there. We have a hard time being able to prioritize investments and make better decisions about how we operate our services without access to information. And that starts with sensors and data gathering and other technologies that are commodities and available. We see it a little more in electricity, but across food security, national security, more sharing of information, more public interfaces, more standards-based approaches to information and not being in proprietary silos really unlocks innovation, and it gives rise to new opportunities for technologists and entrepreneurs, and it can accelerate the pace of innovation. So I think that's a really key thing. It goes back to policy to some degree. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Those are hard things to overcome. There's a lot of entrenched interests. People don't want to share. Proprietary models sort of rule in our economies. But to the degree that we can work towards advocating for open data standards, I think that can go a long way towards accelerating innovation and solving some of these problems.
Last person between you and lunch. First, let me just say I think it's a little bit of a trick question, because I think pretty much all solutions to climate change really need more attention and more investment. We're not doing enough. We're just not. Specifically on the innovation point, I gotta defend it a little bit. Of course, we absolutely have technologies. It's so flipping stupid that some of the technologies Amy works on are not being deployed in these countries. It's just, it's maddening to me whenever we talk about it. And yes, there are lots of technologies out there which are already at cost parity. I think there's still a lot of areas, specific areas, where innovation is needed. And I think as impact investors start to become involved in this area, what's important to remember is that, you know, electricity, solar, it's not one global solar market. These types of technologies are, you know, this massive aggregation of very specific markets where they are being applied, and the economics of the different places matter, and the infrastructure that is there in the place matters. So where one technology could be economical, you know, in one area, in another area it won't be. And I think that applies, I mean, I work mostly in energy, but I think it applies in lots of other, you know, areas where companies, technologies are addressing climate change. So I think what's needed is more specificity around what is the right solution in the right place at the right time.
Excellent, thank you. So I'd like all of us to come together and enjoy lunch together. We'll be in the main pavilion all the way to the left, all the way to the right. And walking away, just inviting everyone to really think about what your carbon handprint is. So again, your carbon footprint is kind of all your negative impact that you're trying to reduce. Your carbon handprint is what you could possibly do positively. What solutions can you work on? What opportunities are out there? And one thing you can do is support whoever you spoke with today. So reach out to that person, see who they need to meet, and, you know, together we'll be stronger. So try to meet everyone in the room, and let's grow the movement. And thank you so much to our panelists.